Right, Chair, you're live on YouTube whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Constitution and Members Development Committee. We'll start with the first item on the agenda. Minutes of the Constitution for the 8th of October. Can we agree those, please?
Great.
Thank you.
Chair, could I ask a question on the minutes, please?
Yes, of course you can.
Just to remind ourselves, on item 21/6, it says the paperless meetings report had been withdrawn. Can we just remind ourselves where that report's going to and how it's going to progress, please?
Right. It was going to be on the council meeting on the 18th, but now we've cancelled that. It's been put back. It'll come back about March, I think. Is that right, Charlotte? March for the...
It is right, Chair. Yes, Councillor Halawi, what we wanted to do on reflection with that is do some more work with you and other members.
That's what I thought, yes.
Yeah, we want to do some more work to understand what members want and need around paperless or paper-light meetings, because
that's right. That's what
we
I thought
recognise
we needed to discuss, yeah.
I think so, yeah. We realise as a driver in terms of the environment and the green strategy, and also with the way that we've adapted through COVID, we realise that there's a lot more, that we've made great strides in terms of the digital approach and a lot more experience of technology. But I think we probably need to understand a bit more where members are at and where you feel that you'd like to go with it. So we plan to do a survey in the early part of the new year, which is why we're putting it off to March. So we've got that time to do that, to engage with you a bit more.
So that will come into the council meeting in March, you think?
We expect so.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted that clarification, Chair. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Okay. Right, we'll carry on. Declarations of interest. Anybody got declarations of interest for today? I can't see anybody's hand up. Okay, so we'll carry on with item number 3, which is the Constitution update, and it's the monitoring officer is going to present that. So, Charlotte, over to you.
Chair, Councillor Thompson just had a hand up. I don't know if she's got a question before I start.
Sorry. I'll just explain something before we start. I'm trying to do this off 2 screens, right? And I'm going literally cross-eyed with it, so I'm struggling. So obviously I've got all the paperwork on a screen on this side, and I'm trying to look at people's faces on that side. So I apologise if I miss you if you've got your hand up. It's just, you'll just have to put up with me for a while till I get used to it. I'm sorry. Right, Councillor
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait till Charlotte's done a presentation and ask my question at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Charlotte, over to you again.
Thanks, Chair. If you don't mind, Sylvia and I will probably do a joint approach with all the reports on the agenda. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, so to start off, as you know, we generally bring this Constitution update where we've made any changes to the Constitution, or where we propose to make changes to the Constitution. So I'm doing the same as you, flicking through on the same screen. So if I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at the papers. Just a second. So if we, for those who have papers, look at paragraph 3 of the report, there are some changes that we would propose. And the first one is at 3C(1), that this proposed amendment arises from the last council meeting, actually, where we had a motion, didn't we? And it was clear that when we'd updated the Constitution previously, around the time for amendments to motions, we'd used the wrong word. So what we'd implied through the previous amendment was that we must have amendments to motions in advance of the council meeting. Now, what we don't want to do is frustrate live debate and challenge and so on. So that should I think I might have said that the wrong way around. So where it was previously mandatory in effect, which was incorrect in the Constitution, that you must have amendments in before the council meeting, that clashed with one of the urgent motions anyway, an urgent motion. So that what we want to achieve is a position where ideally you bring amendments in advance and you let us know about them so that we can understand what they are, work with you if it needs a bit of rewording. But obviously on the night during the debate, if it becomes apparent that you want to make an amendment, you can still do that. So it's preferable that we have amendments to propose motions in advance, but also we allow them on the night. So does that make sense? It's just a slight word change from must to should.
Right.
Actually,
and then,
It is a very significant change, isn't it? It's only a word, but there's a lot of emphasis behind there. So I think we really do need to be clear. Unless we wanted to change it, whether it's an urgent motion. I agree with that, but I think it's quite significant, actually.
Now, what was already provided for, and I probably didn't explain this very well, Councillor Halawi, is that there's a different bit of the Constitution that allows you as a member to propose an amendment to a motion on the night. So there was already that provision in the Constitution, but if you didn't know to look for it, you might have been put off putting an amendment in on the night because the word must was used in relation to the notice period rather than should. So there was basically a clash because we'd used the wrong word. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes. I
good,
just realised it's a significant change and I wanted to emphasise that, but I understand where you're coming from. There's a clash. Thank you.
And then the second thing is to do with, and this is at page 8 of the agenda pack, the Officer Employment Procedure Rules, and what they provide around the appointment of the head of paid service is currently what the rules provide is that the appointment of head of paid service, insofar as the selection goes, is delegated to Chief Officer Appointments Committee. And then, as you know, Chief Officer Appointments Committee come back to Council with a recommendation. They want to appoint one of the candidates and the Council makes the decision to approve or doesn't. But what the Constitution is currently drafted in the Officer Employment Procedure Rules doesn't allow is for Council to do that whole process if it wants to. It doesn't explicitly allow that. So essentially what that would mean is Council taking back that responsibility, that process. And when we looked at it, we felt that it needed to be explicit that if Council so chose, it could take back that responsibility for the selection of the head of paid service. As you can probably imagine, it was relevant to the report that we had at the Council meeting, not the last one, but the one before, which considered the operating model of the senior management of the Council. Because we wanted to have a situation where if an alternative head of paid service needs to be appointed, then it could be for Council to do that without reference to the Chief Officer Appointments Committee as a possibility. So this amendment will allow that going forward. It'll allow Council to do that task if it sees fit. And this mirrors what other authorities do and what their rules say. I can see, Chair, that Councillor Halawi's got a hand up.
Right, Councillor Thompson wishes to speak. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. My question was around about the appointment of the head of paid service, and where it says that the appointment committee will be made up of 7 members. Should that not be politically balanced members rather than just 7 members? Thank you, Chair.
Charlotte, can you answer?
You mean it should have the words in there, politically balanced?
Yeah, right. It only says committee will be made up of 7 members nominated annually, but shouldn't that be that it should be a political balance? Because if you just read by 7 members, that could be dominated by one party. So it should be politically balanced, in my view. I don't know what
As I understand it, though, all committees are politically balanced in any event, and it's implicit. Is that right, Sylvia? Is that why the words aren't explicitly stated there? I think you're muted, Sylvia.
Can I not just ask, well, why is it not just put the words in then? That it be political members made up of a political balance, so why not add that in?
Why not?
Yeah, there's no problem doing that, but it is catered for within the political balance rules, in that the council have determined that if one councillor objects to any committees not being politically balanced, then they all should be politically balanced, apart from the executive, of course, because that's not subject to council decision. So at this point in time, I think last year we did have a councillor that objected to any committee not being politically balanced. So they are all politically balanced, as Charlotte said, but there's no problem in putting that in there. It's easily amendable.
Okay, Councillor Thompson. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Right, Charlotte, carry on.
I think Councillor Halawi's also got a question, Chair. Do you want to wait until the end, or shall I take Councillor Halawi's question?
Councillor Lowy, do you want to do it now or do you want to wait?
It's quite relevant to what Charlotte was saying. That's why I was thinking now.
Go on then.
One point I had to make, I agree with you, Charlotte, that if most councils are taking back responsibility in the way that you just said at the end of what you said, then I agree that we should too. My other question that occurred when I was reading it in advance was that it reads as if the council rubber stamps the decision that's already been made. And maybe that's what it is. But there isn't a clause in there that describes what might happen if the council didn't agree with the appointment that was being proposed.
I think to take your first point first, I probably haven't put myself across as well as I could, because what I was trying to say was that usually it would still be that Chief Officer Appointments Committee would be expected to do the selection, interviewing and so on around the appointment of head of paid service, for them to then make a recommendation to council as to the appropriate candidate that they think, based on their selection process, council should approve. But it may be that there are circumstances when it would be appropriate for council to do all of that work. So say if it was an internal selection exercise between existing directors, which was part of what was proposed, if you remember, when we were looking at alternatives to the chief, the current chief executive operating model. And if we'd moved to a head of paid service model, there would have been a need in the future to appoint a new head of paid service. So what I was saying about other councils is that other councils had the interchangeability in their rules, which would allow either chief officer or equivalent committee to do the selection process, or council who delegated it originally out to chief officer appointments committee. So it was just a sort of belt and braces approach really that we were trying to incorporate in our rules and our constitution to mirror what other authorities do, but on the understanding that if in the unlikely event that we don't have a chief executive, the current chief executive goes in the future, the likelihood would be it would be a big selection exercise, which would probably involve chief officer appointments committee because of the work involved. But on some occasions, alternatively, it may be appropriate simply for council to do it if there was a less onerous exercise required to appoint somebody. Does that make, have I made that a bit clearer now?
Yes, that's what I thought in the first place, actually. But I think
okay.
Yeah, that's what I think. I just think the belt and braces position would be better, because then that's what I'm really saying. I approve that, because we'd only be in an unfortunate position and not have a constitution which backs up where we need to be.
And then your second question was what if council didn't accept the recommendation that had come from Chief Officer Appointments Committee about the candidates that Chief Officer Appointments Committee would recommend for appointment to the head of paid service role. And as I understand it, the recommendation is backed by a rationale. I haven't been here actually when this has been done, so Sylvia might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. It's backed by a rationale because the work has been done by Chief Officer Appointments Committee and those members, so they articulate a rationale as to why the person is the best candidate. If council decided not to recommend that candidate, I think they'd have to have a very good reason why it was felt that wasn't appropriate, with information that wasn't apparent to Chief Officer Appointments Committee at the time that they made the recommendation. Because if Chief Officer Appointments Committee have been tasked with doing the exercise, then in effect council is saying we don't think that you've done the job properly and we push it back to you. And I think it would have to be something along those lines as to why the reasoning used by Chief Officer Appointments Committee wasn't seen to be robust enough by council when making the recommendation. What I'm saying is it would have to be about the process, I think, rather than the person.
Yeah, I agree, Charlotte, with what you're saying, and that's what I was thinking. So I was really, I suppose, asking that there's a paragraph in there that says something like that, so that really it is that we delegate that responsibility totally to the Chief Officer Appointment Committee, and we don't disagree with it almost, although there could be a circumstance where different evidence comes to light that the Chief Officer Appointments Committee wasn't aware of. That's all I'm saying, that there's that loophole to me that could really shouldn't be there.
I mean, you've legally got to have the appointment made by full council That's why
right.
full council is asked to do that particular.
So it's
appointment.
rubber stamping if there's, you know what I mean? It's sort of just rubber stamping then. But that's okay if that's what we agree with. I'm just looking at a potential loophole.
I'd say it's more than rubber stamping, because as councillors, you've got to be assured that that person is the person who would be up to the job.
Except it's
You
rubber
you have to have
stamping
enough
if we have-
information. Yeah. I think Sylvia might want to come in, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, also as part of the process for chief officer appointments, once somebody's appointed, considered for appointment, then we also have to write to each of the executive members as well to ask them if they have any objections to that appointment. So hopefully any objections to that should come prior to full council as well. So there's another mechanism there. But like Charlotte was saying, council have to have due regard to the recommendations being made, and they're being made on the committee taking HR regulations into account. Obviously, people are appointed on merit, and so they would have had to approve that during the interview process. And quite often where it is a statutory senior officer at that level, there's several interviews rather than just one. So if there are multiple people, there's generally a process that those people go through. It's not just a one-off interview. And so by that point, the committee has quite a good understanding of the person that they're planning or they're recommending to appoint. So that should give full council some confidence in the recommendation being put forward.
Thank you. Chair, I understand that, and I understand the process of selection. It was just that I saw a potential problem in there that I thought might need to be arranged by a sentence or paragraph that covers it, so there isn't that potential problem.
Right, Charlotte?
You can have a look at that, councillor.
It might be something that we could put into the terms of reference of the committee.
Of the officer, the chief officer appointments committee. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
So I think that needs refreshing anyway, doesn't it, Sylvia?
Yeah.
We said we'd look at that anyway.
Okay, well, if it's going to be dealt with elsewhere, I'm happy for it to be dealt with in a different arrangement. Thank you, Chair. And
then the last bit, Sylvia's going to cover about councillors' called for action, if that's okay.
Okay. Sylvia?
The councillors' call for action was an outstanding action from last year's scheme that we were looking to update. Currently in the council's constitution, there is only one line on councillors' calls for action. It doesn't articulate anywhere what calls for action is. And therefore there was a thought as to whether we should add the council's call for action process into the constitution, so members understand that there is an alternative route for them to deal with an issue where they've tried all other avenues and not been able to solve a local issue within their ward, that they can then ask for scrutiny to then look at that issue as part of a councillor call for action. And so this is the process that's already in place, but it's actually in the scrutiny handbook. And as I say, there's no reference apart from one line in the constitution saying councillors call for action under scrutiny. And therefore it's where the committee wanted to add this process into the constitution. As I say, we haven't changed the process, it's just in the scrutiny handbook at present, which hasn't been refreshed since 2017, I don't think. I don't know what members' thoughts were on that.
Anybody got anything to say?
Can I just add something?
Yes, Charlotte, yes.
Which is something that Sylvia and I were talking about just before the meeting, and it relates to the next agenda item as well. With the constitution, what we want to achieve is a document online that has what Sylvia's described to me as chapters. So it's one comprehensive document that has in it everything that anybody would need if they want to understand the rules of the council and associated documents. Because at times in the past, we've had some bits of the documentary the suite of documents, I guess, that we'd refer to as online and others not, and then you've got a one-line reference to something. So we want to create a more streamlined document that you click on and it's got, a bit like we have on our modern gov system, thumbnails or similar down the side where we can see exactly how to access each individual document. And that's a bit of a work in progress. And we think, whilst we're conscious of not creating a huge document, if it's presented correctly, especially online, it doesn't matter really how big it is, as long as it's easily navigable, I think. It's probably what I'm trying to say.
But don't you think, Charlotte, it's going to take some doing that time?
Yeah, probably. But Sylvia's already started
Okay.
work on it.
Right. Sylvia, have you finished? Is that your...
Yeah, I don't know. Did you have
Anybody got any comments for Sylvia? Councillor Rooney, I see you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Just looking through the document itself, it might be helpful because there's a section there about what you should do first, to have some kind of flow chart that just helps people navigate the process. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Rooney. Anybody else? No? Right, so can we all note that report and just hope that we carry on and get it all sorted eventually? Next
I think
item.
we're asking that Councillor, that the committee approves the changes.
Right,
that's
okay.
set out
Do
in
the
the
committee
report.
approve all the changes that we've gone through? Do we all understand them all? Are we all in favour?
Agreed.
Anybody not? No, okay. Right, next item is the political balance. Once again, it's the monitoring officer, Charlotte.
And again, I'll do a joint effort with Sylvia if
That's
you don't
fine,
mind.
yeah,
But
yeah.
the
yeah.
essence of this is we're asking whether you want this to be included, I think as an appendix, is that right, to the Constitution? Because the document itself is already established and has been approved by this committee.
Yeah, back in February 2020, this committee asked for an explanation on the rules of political balance and how it worked. And therefore, we provided a report to the committee, which is basically what's detailed in this report now. And again, it's whether you want these rules clear in the Constitution, because again, it is a very small amount of information about how political balance works within the Constitution. So, and again, whether members think these rules should be clearly displayed within the Constitution. So again, people know and groups know how the political balance is allocated within Middlesbrough.
Anybody any questions on that? Councillor Rooney?
It's not a question. I just think it's good to have because it did cause quite some confusion, I think, at the last AGM. So it's good to see that it's been set out clearly. So thank you for doing that.
Right. Councillor Helawi?
I agree with Councillor Rooney, and that this should be very clear and evident, because if there's any comeback or any questions, I think we need to be very carefully able to answer with clarity where we're coming from.
Okay.
I am a bit worried sometimes in terms of this, the sort of mathematics of percentage, point something percentage, and if we take the 0.5 as a plus and less than 0.5 as a not minus position, if that very same fine line is applied over several different scrutiny panels or committees, then I've got a feeling there's an element of unfairness there. Do you see what I mean in terms of that fine line divide amongst how many people of whichever political balance are in a committee? That was my thoughts when I read that.
Yeah, and when it comes to when those arrive, the political balance rules basically say that basically the majority group should get the majority of seats. So if there was an equal, if the calculations made it that there was an equal number of seats, then the number with the highest, the largest group should take that seat. Should have preferences as to whether the first preference as to whether they have that seat. So that's where we say when those calculations are made, you take your first choice. So the Labour group will take the first choice of their allocation. So you're entitled to so many seats. You take your first choice of the allocation. What you don't take is then passed on to the next group, where it isn't automatic. So it'll go down to the next highest group. So
I understand that. Chair, could I just say, I understand that, Sylvia. I thought in the last arrangement for selection of people onto different panels, for example, that it came down to percentage, but it came down to decimal points. Let me put it that way. Is that not right, Sylvia? That we had a very fine line against numbers, and it came down to decimal points.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's where they're equal. Yes, it's where it's equal. It's where groups have got similar numbers, but over the
yes, that's right.
ratios.
So,
yeah.
so on that issue, then precisely, if we're talking decimal point places, and if it's, you know, so I suppose if it's over 0.5, then a particular group gets that place allocation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's 0.4, well, they wouldn't, right? Because that's less than the median. However, if there were lots of panels, numerous panels, where it was always taken on that fine line decimal point provision, to me, because it's such a small difference, it's beginning to look unfair. So say we had to operate on that balance of a decimal point, 0.5 plus, over several committees, 7 of them, and every time, you know, over those 7 committees, because it was based on that 0.5 position, they got all of the seats, which is what is currently the position that we're in. It seems that it would be a bit unfair that just because you're a whisker away, you don't get those political numbers for that different group that's sort of second in line. So to me, to make it fair, I don't know, there would be some number of panels where that should apply. Otherwise, it begins to be unfair.
What you've got is you're entitled, but you're entitled. As a group, you're only entitled to an overall number of seats.
I know.
So you're never going to get all of the seats that you're requesting, especially where those balances, and that's where we're saying there'll be occasions where you have to make a choice about which you have first choice, but you still only have a finite amount of seats. You're never going to get all of those seats. So you, as a group, you then have to decide which one of those seats you would prefer to take. Those others are then, so that's where the fairness then runs in that. As the largest group, you would have first choice, but you're still only entitled to that many seats overall.
Right.
It's difficult to understand, I know, but
yeah. Matthew, you wish to speak, sir?
Yeah, I take Alma's point, but I mean, unfortunately, I'm not sure how you can really do it any more fairly than that. It feels to me like we have to have some kind of system, and you know, I totally agree. 0.5 and just over 0.5, it is infuriating that ends up getting sort of rounded up, and you end up with essentially a rounding system that delivers places to political groups. But I really don't. I personally cannot think of another way of resolving that. I think it's probably the best of a bad lot. Really, it's probably all we can really do.
Thank you, Councillor. I agree with you. Sylvia, do you want to say any more, or Charlotte, are you finished on that item?
no, it's just asking the committee as to whether they
Yes, we're doing that now.
they have.
Okay. The resolution is like, can we approve all this? Can we put this into submission to full council for approval? Are we all in favour of that? Anybody not in favour? All in favour? Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item 5, which is social media framework policy and guidelines for elected members. Once again, it's Charlotte, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Chair. So this piece of work came from some work that an ad hoc scrutiny panel did. And the work that's being done here came from one of the recommendations of that panel. And so what's been set out in the report and in the appendix is social media framework and policy and guidelines for members. Now, this is obviously really relevant and prevalent because increasingly our communications are done on social media. So what this policy does is set out expectations of members in terms of how to use social media, picking up certain particular points. And as you'll be aware, use of social media is referenced in the Code of Conduct. and can sometimes be an area that's complained about. It can sometimes be, and it's often a very effective forum for communication. And Andrew Glover's here, and he can say more about that because he's had a lot to do with the production of this policy. But it can be an area of pitfalls for members, particularly thinking about when you're acting in your official capacity, thinking about the etiquette of social media, what happens if you like or share a particular post that might not be appropriate. And so the policy goes into some detail about issues like that. And what we intend to do is cross-reference it in the Code of Conduct as well, so that it forms something that can be used as a more detailed guide for members and a reference for anybody investigating a complaint about members' use of social media. Don't know whether Andrew or Sylvie want to add any more about that.
Sylvia, do you want to say anything first?
Yeah, obviously, this was, as Charlotte said, this is something that the scrutiny panel raised and was agreed by executive as an action. So we don't currently have a policy that is specifically for members. We have a staff policy on social media, and this will interact with that as well, so that we have clarity across for members and officers, really. I don't know if you want to make some comments, Andrew.
Come on in, Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. I think all I would add really is that there can be many advantages clearly for members to use social media and to communicate directly with people in their ward and further afield. And what this framework does really is just try to flag up some of the pitfalls, give some advice around do's and don'ts to try and ensure it doesn't become a problematic area for us, really.
Thank you, Andrew. Anybody got any questions? Councillor Rooney?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for putting this together. I think it's really comprehensive. There's only one point, 3.7. It says the council's logo or any council-related material must only be used in an official capacity. Can we have a better explanation of what that means?
Andrew?
I mean, it doesn't say, you know, what council-related material might be and what an official capacity is.
Can I let Andrew answer that, perhaps? Or
Yeah.
Thanks.
Andrew, can you answer that?
Yeah, I think what that's getting at, Councillor Rooney, is that official official logos and materials and so on should only be used on pages that are labelled as councillor pages rather than on personal accounts. That would be my understanding of it.
Right.
So you can have, I mean, Middlesbrough Council don't currently have councillor websites, but some other local authorities do. But we don't at present. So if you use your own social media site, then you shouldn't be using the council logo as part of your private site, because the council have no control over that. But obviously you can use the council logo on letterheads if you're sending letters, then that's fine. But or it might be that you're acting as you know, a councillor on a committee, and that you might be you're on a committee and you're giving, you know, if something's a response on social media about a committee that you're involved in, you may be, you know, put a response out there with a logo on or a letter that you've had to provide evidence of that. So I very much doubt you would use councillor logos anywhere on personal social media sites.
Just come back in. I agree that it would be very rare for somebody to use it, but at the same time, I wouldn't want anybody to read that and think that they can use the logo in any shape or form. Because if for example, the post is defamatory in any way, does it then involve the council in any action? And I'd just like, you know, a bit more of an explanation about what that sentence actually means. That's all I'm asking for.
Andrew, can you enlighten us?
I think we'll just look to tighten it up, Chair, so it's better explained, if that's okay.
That be okay, Councillor Rooney?
Smashing. Thank you.
Councillor Story, you were next, sir.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a really good the protocol. I think it makes a lot of sense. One thing that I think probably we should have some specific provisions on is guidance for the executive and the mayor in terms of council policy and announcements thereof, because I think often in recent past, particularly with the mayor's Facebook page, that has to some extent circumvented council publicity materials, and what's ended up happening is the mayor announces something privately on his own page, which goes out to the public from his own personal page, sorry, and then the council plays catch up essentially on the announcement, and then we're kind of behind the curve on that. I think that if you're the mayor of Middlesbrough or you're an executive member, you want to announce policy, that inevitably the best way to do that is through social media, and it's really important to avail yourself of that. But I think it needs to go through the council's official channels first, and that those governance procedures need to be tight, so that when we're delivering policy through the executive, it's being done through the proper channels, and it's not being announced ad hoc and being seen on personal Facebook pages before it's being seen through the council's official organs, because I think that's where it needs to start from. And then from that point, we can all share council policy and announcements and other things however we see fit. But the primacy of council official channels needs to be stressed, I think, in a more explicit way within the protocol, because I think that is a major problem for the authority, and has actually been since May 2019.
Thank you, Councillor. Andrew, do you want to come in on that? Or Charlotte, either of you, do you want to put some input into it?
I'll respond briefly, Chair. I think one thing that we tried to do a number of months ago was to make sure that all members received copies of media releases as they were issued, so that everybody got access to the information at the same time. And I would agree with Councillor Story that if it's official council business, if it's a paper that's coming to executive, for instance, then that should be shared by our official council channels. I know that is something that we're going to be looking at more closely in the coming months in terms of providing roundups, for instance, of business that's coming to executive. I know I've discussed that with Charlotte in the past. But if you've got any specific examples, Councillor Story, things where you think there has been too much of a gap, bring them to my attention and I'll look at that.
Thank you, Andrew. Anybody else got anything to say? Councillor Halawi, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I approve the document. The part that concerns me is the section about failure to comply. I just feel that's not very robust. Or is it that the mention of standards means that that's all going to be explored elsewhere? I just feel that we need more meat in that section. It just seems light. In view of the balance of all the explanations we had in the preceding paragraph, to get to that failure to comply or go to standards. Just felt that was light, too light.
Charlotte, can you elaborate?
Yeah, I do take that point, Councillor. However, we've got to be clear that the formal process is standards. Now, as part of the standards approach, we have a kind of multi-step approach where initially we would try to resolve something if we can, using group leaders and between members and with not necessarily formal but informal dialogue and mediation. The other end of the spectrum would be obviously an investigation, but I'm trying to say we have a range of options under the standards process, but if there is an alleged breach of the policy which tips into standards, then it's right that it goes into the standards process, because that's the formal statutory procedure that we have to work with when we're thinking about members' behaviour.
Could I come back with another question?
Yes, you can, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I take your point, Charlotte, and I see where you're coming from. But I'm just thinking that if someone wants to refer to the Constitution in view of an infringement of the standards that we expect in terms of social media, so somebody would refer themselves to the social media aspect to be sure about where they stand. And then in order to think about, well, someone hasn't adhered to these regulations, then I now need to go to the standards document and read all about that. I just feel that there needs to be a closer cross-reference to enable people to have more direct access, to what failure to comply to this situation might mean? Or are you saying that it's exactly the same as everything else, and so go and read the standards document now?
I think probably yes, but maybe what we can do is have a hyperlink, if we can do that in the
Yes,
document
that's a
once it's
good idea.
published, that takes you to standards, to the members' code of conduct, so that it's accessible
think-
that way.
Chair, just to explore it a bit further, I may. Is there anything more specific in terms of the standards that really relates to this whole idea of social media activity? So are there, standards are such a general thing that relate to all aspects of adherence to expectations and standards? Are there any more specific aspects of standard that can be weeded out to refer directly to social media infractions?
I think it depends what it is. So the things that spring to
All
mind
right.
off the top of my head would be if something is being said on social media, for example, by one councillor about another, then that could be seen to be a breach of the members' code of conduct, because it could be seen to be bullying and harassment. However, if in the alternative something was shared by a councillor on social media, or liked by a councillor, or commented on by a councillor on social media, that was perhaps inappropriate because of its content, because of the nature of its content. Let's say it had racist content in the post or in what was shared, then that could potentially be caught by the provision about bringing the council into disrepute. So it would really depend on the type of activity, and to try and narrow it down means we maybe miss something. To try and give examples which lead you to think, oh, it could be this, it could be that, means you sometimes might miss.
Well, I would, Chair, if I could just make a suggestion, I would like to suggest that actually some of the most prevalent type of infringements of the regulations about code of conduct, and there are some that would be more frequently, a case than others, that we have 2 or 3 examples of what would happen in terms of, the standards when it refers to the social media. So when you talked about, 1 or 2 people, harassment or bullying, or if it's, because they're the most frequent problems, aren't they, with social media? There are problems that are more frequent with social media than any other. So the thoughts of having to read through a whole standards document to try and find out which bit your case might refer to, if you're trying to look for what to do and what the case is all about. I think some examples of the most frequent situations would be helpful in the document as examples, and not, not exclusive, but the most frequent problems with social media in terms of standards.
Charlotte?
I think Sylvia wants to say something, so if I can let Sylvia come in, Chair, if that's
Sorry,
okay.
Sylvia.
Yeah.
Sylvia?
If you just scroll down to the pictures of the examples of the headers and footers that you can put onto the sites, that gives you some examples of what you shouldn't do, which is basically what are breaches of the code of conduct. So rule 1, debate and disagreement are welcome on this page, but only if expressed with courtesy, respect and politeness. So that's what you're expecting people. And those courtesy, respect and politeness are under the code of conduct, treating other people with respect. So these are basically the examples that I think you're asking for in the actual policy, rather than as the headers and footers. So we can add something like those in if
yeah, I think they're the examples, Sylvia, that what we're meant to do and not meant to do. But we need to know what the consequences are of non-adherence to these expectations. What is going to happen if you fail to comply with these expectations?
Well, that's the standards, that's already in.
You've got the standards, won't you? Obviously.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, it's complicated. I was suggesting we simplify that and put some examples of the standards consequent. What would happen?
You mean of the sanctions, potentially?
Well, I think one, in terms of the types of examples that could be a failure to comply, given that what Sylvia just read out. I mean, that, but what would the sanctions be? So say somebody does write some harassing material about somebody on social media, what's going to happen to them? What's going to happen? What's the failure to comply? What?
And that would be down to the standards committee.
That would be up to the standards committee.
Yes, it would, yeah. But I just feel, okay, so we just have to say that now. We don't know what's going to happen, basically. The failure to comply just means you go to standards. I just feel that's not very strongly expressed. Just seems a bit of a weakness in the policy.
You've made your point, Councillor Halawi.
That's fine. Yes, thank you. Yes.
Can we now move on? Councillor Hubbard, you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's in relation to page 38, item 6.2, and it's about training, and it says training should be carried out on a mandatory requirements on an annual basis and minimum in brackets. I would just ask the committee to consider changing that to mandatory training for the first elected term, because what you're asking here is every year on an annual basis. We've got a by-election on the 16th, I think, next week. So I would think if this policy was changed from when the person's first elected, they should have to undertake mandatory training within the first couple of months. But I can't see why we all need training year after year after being elected. I think it should just be every 4 years in office, and then thereafter. And I think if you break the code of conduct, like Councillor Lowry was saying, that's one of the things that's left open as standards where they can say they need mandatory training thereafter. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I quite agree with you, Councillor Hubbard. Charlotte, what do you say? Could we change things?
Let me just find your mute button. I think so. The only question in my mind would be if there's a major change that happens in the meantime, you know, different social media platform becomes available which has different functionality, but then we can review that if that's the case, can't we? Otherwise, I don't see any reason.
Yeah. I agree with Councillor Hubbard. You know, I mean, I've been a councillor quite a long time, and to get training after training after training for the same thing seems a bit, well, it seems a bit futile to me. It's a bit of a waste of time, but that's how things are. Right. Anybody? Charlotte, you wish to speak again?
Sorry, Chair, just a thought that what I think we could probably do better, and this is down to me really, is if there are decisions around anything to do with standards really, and social media activities, a pertinent one, we send lessons learned out to briefs out to members so that you know in this particular case, in Colchester Council, for example, there was a finding that member so and so did this. This sort of thing is relevant when we do investigations, but it's probably useful as a learning point and maybe something we can work on.
All right, thank you.
We can send you developing information.
Anybody else got anything to say on this? Can't see anybody. Right, well, we've been asked to approve this for inclusion in the handbook. Well, probably with one or two little things like things that Councillor Hubbard said. Could we all agree with that? Is it everybody in agreement? All nodding heads. Right, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is something we don't have any papers for. It's a verbal update. It was something that was asked for by one of our members. It's GDPR for elected members. And I think Sylvia's going to do this. Are you, Sylvia?
Chair, can I just ask before you, Sylvia, thing with that? Can I just ask why? Why is there no written report on the next two agenda items?
That's a good question. Perhaps you can answer, Sylvia, can you? I don't know.
I didn't realise I was asked to give a report. I thought I was just being asked to give a response. And Janet was wanting to raise a verbal issue through the committee about whether GDPR should be mandatory training. And that is one of the questions that we have a number of items already in the member development policy that are mandatory, but data protection training isn't a mandatory option at present, but it's something for the committee that can put forward for council to amend or to amend the policy that we've currently got. I don't know if you wanted to go through, Janet, about what your issues were.
Councillor Thompson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've asked for this to be on. As people may or may not be aware, I'm currently advising a resident who feels that there's been a data breach by circulating names and addresses of residents who signed a petition So can you clarify who is responsible under GDPR in this situation? Thank you, Chair.
Charlotte, can you enlighten us on that?
We've had some advice, we've had some dialogue, haven't we? Councillor Thompson behind the scenes with our data protection officer giving written advice about the matter. So I don't propose to go into the detail of that now, partly because I didn't appreciate that you'd want to go through the detail of that, and it'd be better if the data protection officer was here to give that advice personally, I think, with it being a particularly technical area. But I think suffice to say, I'm quite confident in the advice that he's given on the point.
Yeah. Can I just
Councillor
come back
Thompson?
on that,
Yeah, come
Chair?
back, yes. Yeah.
I was just giving an example, and because we're discussing GDPR and council petitions and private petitions, that's why I give that example, and that's why I wanted to bring it to this meeting to be discussed. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So you don't want to talk about council petitions and private petitions, and is that?
Yeah, I was referring to that. So that covers the two, agenda item 6 and agenda item 7. So
Right.
I give that example, which and that I wanted to clarify and to discuss it here, because I don't think that it's clarified about, you know, the responsible under the GDPR.
Councillor Rooney?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, in terms of the petitions, I don't think we understand who owns the data between a petition that's got up by residents in an area and then ask the local councillor to either support or help with in one way, and something that goes onto the council system. Now, if it goes onto the council system, then that's very clear. It's owned by the council, it's monitored and administered by the council. But when the information comes from another source, who is responsible for controlling that information? Because it is also linked to the local authority. And there are times when that information is then passed into the council. And this is one of the confusions, I think, that happened. You know, who owns that data and who is therefore responsible for ensuring that it's kept safe. That was one of the things. And then the GDPR for elected members. I'm not convinced that all of our members understand what that is and what their responsibilities are. And I think I wanted that explored as well and explained. And I did send some documents through to Democratic Services, and I can resend them. One's an LGA document that goes into some detail about responsibilities, and the other one's from the ICO. And the both of them have got hyperlinks and stuff with them, and I think they could form the basis of a presentation, if you like, or some information out to councillors. Thanks. It's a bit long-winded, but thank you.
Yeah. Charlotte?
I was just going to say, Chair, and Councillor Rooney, that it may be useful in which case to have perhaps a briefing from the data protection officer, if a report if needed. But I wonder if we're thinking about issues to do with information governance and data, is that more the preserve of the Corporate Affairs and Audit Committee rather than it being an issue for Constitution and Member Development Committee? I know Councillor Hubbard's here. I don't know. It might be useful to have it delivered in some form. It might be that members want an informal briefing instead.
Councillor Hubbard, can you answer that, do you think?
I think Councillor Thompson and Councillor Rooney is totally correct in this. I think it is a grey area. It does need further looking into. Might be something to take to the Corporate Affairs and Audit, maybe to look into as some type of policy.
Okay. Thank you,
Down
Councillor Hubbard.
to the committee if they think that's totally correct or not. But I do understand it is a grey area. Especially, I don't think there's been any training around it. Thanks, Chair.
No. Thanks, Councillor Hubbard. Councillor Thompson?
Can I just say that I attended the Corporate Audit and Affairs Committee. and I did raise this under any other business when I was there, and I was told that it needed to come to the Constitution and members. So I've already raised it there, and they've told me to bring it here.
Charlotte, have you got anything to say?
Well, sorry about that, Councillor Thompson. I didn't mean to cause confusion by trying to make it ping back and forth. I think Sylvia's got something to say about it.
Sylvia?
Yeah, I'll just go back a little bit. In relation to petitions, basically the council has a petition scheme, in which case the public can submit a petition to the council. As part of our petition scheme, what we do is share that information with a councillor. So when the petition comes in, the councillor is responsible for that data. But in our petition scheme, we say that we will share that information with councillors for that ward, so that they can be aware of issues that are going on in their ward, and as a representative of that ward, they're given that information for information only. That information, once they receive that information as a ward council, as a representative, they then become responsible for that data. For what they do with that data. The council give them it for information only, so they then become responsible for that data. Under the data protection regulations, councillors have a duty to act as a data controller in their own rights. So that means once you receive data and you're acting in that role as a councillor, i.e. as a ward representative, then you're responsible for any data that you collect or use, and you're therefore responsible for following the general data protection rules and regulations. All councillors are given some basic guidance on general data protection during inductions, and it's also included in the members' handbook too. But we've also spoken to the data protection officer, and there is a data protection e-learning module that has been developed and is now available on the council's, the staff's learning system, e-learning module, so you can get into that. It's now I think one of the other questions that Janet and Councillor Thompson and Councillor Rooney were asking is whether that training should be made mandatory, and it is mandatory for staff. And therefore, I do think that the committee should recommend that general data protection training is mandatory for members as well, and that should be undertaken. Staff have to undertake that training on an annual basis, and the first session is full training, and then it's refresher training year after year for that, because we do have to actually make sure as an organisation that we are not open to challenge from the Information Commissioner, because if there was a breach of data protection and it was reported to the Information Commissioner, the first question the Information Commissioner will come and ask is, has that person been trained, and can you give me proof of that training? So obviously, if we put things in place to avoid those breaches, then we're at much less risk of being fined as an organisation, and as an individual councillor you can also be fined as well in your own right, so if you're acting with data in your own right. So I think there is a module there, and I think the question is how we deliver that training, whether it's a briefing and the learning module, or and whether it's mandatory or not.
Thank you, Sylvia. Right, Councillor Hubbard, you had your hand up. You want to come back in again on something?
No, I'll leave that for now, Chair, and I'll come
Okay.
by email to all council.
Councillor Thompson, you want to say something again?
Yeah, I think that's too late, Sylvia, in this instance, given training when something's already happened. And the other thing is, what happens if the data is shared on the Middlesbrough Council headed logo paper? Doesn't that count as a breach of GDPR if we're using our headed logo paper? Thank you, Chair.
It could be classed as a breach, but again, that member is using that information in their own right, and therefore an individual, it would be for the individual to complain to the person that was responsible for, who was the data controller for that information. In this instance that you're talking about, the data controller is the member who received the information. So that's the, it wasn't the council that shared that information. It was a member in their individual role as a data controller. So they become responsible to the Information Commissioner directly.
Thank you, Sylvia. Charlotte, if this training for this GDPR is mandatory for staff, what could we not make it mandatory for all councillors as well? What if we do? Is it this committee that has to recommend it, or does it go somewhere else?
It's for this committee.
And I think the challenge about mandatory training before has been, well, what happens if you, what sanctions do you have?
Yeah.
That's been the issue, hasn't it? Because as staff,
Okay.
if we don't complete our mandatory training, it's potentially a disciplinary issue.
Okay.
More complex with members, but we certainly
So-
make it such.
Yeah. So can this committee make a request then that all councillors get this training as mandatory, or do I have to go to Charlotte, Sylvia?
This is the request here. I was asking this committee whether at the minute this committee is responsible for the member development policy, which
Right.
includes which training modules are mandatory. And therefore it's for this committee to determine whether GDPR modules should be a mandatory
Okay.
section in that policy.
So as a group, are we all in favour of that? Anybody saying no? Nobody's saying no. Okay, Sylvia,
The next question, sorry,
go on.
so
Yeah.
Ruby's got a question, I don't know if she...
Have you got a question, or are you just voting, Councillor Rooney?
No, so I put my hand up as you wanted, as you took the vote. Just to say that, yes, I agree that it should be mandatory, but I also think that when we are sending our information out to members, that is headed up with the possibility of the very great fines that they could potentially have to pay if they breach it. So it just doesn't go out as GDPR training, because that might just go past people. But I think emphasising what a breach actually means when we put that forward. All right, thank you.
Right. Councillor Halawi.
Thank you. I'm just in danger of repeating myself and echoing to some extent what Charlotte says about failure to comply. We're still stuck with that, aren't we, as an issue?
And that was my next question, Chair, as to what the committee thinks should happen for those that do not undertake the training. How do we report that, or how do we sanction people? Does that, if they fail to undertake that training, does it become a standards issue? In which case, does it become a breach of the code of conduct? Or do we make it that it's a public report that the people that haven't undertaken that training, when there's such a large risk to the public and to the individuals themselves?
Well, my legal documentation ran out some years ago, so there's only really Charlotte that can answer that. Charlotte?
Well, I think it partly depends what appetite you've got, because if you want to put it in the code, you can recommend to council that we put it in the code, and it becomes then part of that statutory process. And I think Sylvia is suggesting that as one alternative, or another alternative is not put it in the code, but have a kind of public naming and shaming, for want of a better expression. Is that right, Sylvia? That's what you're suggesting, two alternatives.
Yeah, or the members might have other ideas of what they think we should do if members don't undertake that training. What would they like us to do?
Well, can we not put the situation right by saying the training is mandatory? We'll do the training, we'll find out who didn't go, and then we'll make a decision on that then.
Yeah, because it could be that if you put it into the code of conduct and they fail to undertake that training, then as part of the sanctions through the standards committee, one of the sanctions could be added that we remove access to council equipment council IT equipment, which is obviously a restriction to confidential and personal information.
I don't know. What do you suggest, Charlotte?
I think Councillor Saunders wants to come in with something.
Sorry, Councillor Saunders.
Yeah, it's just a point, Chair. Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, it's just regarding the training. Like others, there will be different dates for the training, won't it? It just won't be one session. There'll be obviously different dates available to members. Yeah, so there's, as much less excuse of not going. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I don't personally think that taking away councillors' computers and things like that, I don't think it's a good idea, because if you take your computer away from you, you can't operate as a ward councillor, can you? Because most of your information comes through that. So I don't think that's a good idea. It's like, it's just not right. But just how we do penalise people or stop them or whatever because they haven't been and done the mandatory training, I don't know. I really don't know. Councillor Rooney?
Can I suggest that we really can't make that decision at the moment, and maybe we need to go away and have some thoughts on it and see if there's any examples with any other authorities.
Well, we could, yes,
I think removing the equipment is a final move, and that's for somebody who's really, behaved very badly. And I think we should always have that in hand anyway. And it's something that we've done in the past with other members. So can I suggest we put this on hold a little bit until we've got a little bit more information, but with the recommendation that we do include it in the mandatory training.
Right. Everyone in favour of that?
Agree.
Against? Nobody against? Right. Okay.
Agreed.
Right. Thank you very much. That's what we'll do. Right. That brings us to the end of the agenda for today. So just like to thank everybody for their attendance. Charlotte?
Sorry to interrupt. I've just got two small things to pick up if you don't mind.
Okay. Any other business? Charlotte?
Were you going to say that? Sorry. The first thing, which Joe has helpfully pointed out, is in the first report we missed something which was a request for more meetings of this committee.
Yes.
To do further work on the Constitution, and we didn't specifically reference that.
Right.
You did approve the recommendations of the report, and that therefore I assume would include more meetings. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. It's fine with me. Yeah.
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 And then the second thing was to pick up on one of Councillor Thompson's earlier comments. I think what's been pointed out to me is I think that the point that you raised, Councillor Thompson, at the Corporate Affairs and Audit Committee that was put to this committee was about exempt reports. And it was agreed at Corporate Affairs back in September that the question of exempt reports and sharing them will be picked up by this committee. Is that right? According to your recollection.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Chair. I think I also raised about petitions as well. So it was exempt report, yeah.
Councillor Hubbard?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, my recollection is the same as Charlotte's. It was just about the exempt reports. There was nothing mentioned about petitions. That's what I was going to email everyone after the meeting. I will go back to the minutes and check on that, Chair. I just want to
thanks, Councillor
clarify first.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure what the point was though about exempt reports, Councillor Thompson.
It was about being able to stay at meetings when exempt reports.
It was attending executive meetings and when it excludes press and public. That clarification of, as our role as councillors, are we classed as, we're not press, but are we classed as the public, and why should we not be able to stay when the exempt press and public? So it was clarification of whether councillors could stay.
It's totally right. It wasn't, I mean, that's why it was nothing about petitions being mentioned at the meeting. We weren't trying to pass anything from pillar to post at all, but...
All right, I do apologise then.
It's no problem at all.
And the position on that, if I can come in on that, it goes back to the access to information procedure rule. So if you see something as a non-executive member on the executive agenda, that's listed as an exempt report, and you think that you want to have access to that for reasons that you can articulate, then you obviously in advance of the meeting can ask to see that grey paper, and that request would be considered against the access to information procedure rule. So your reason would be considered. Presumption being that as a ward councillor, as a member of the authority, it's appropriate that you see papers in the interest of openness and transparency. Now, then what flows from that is if you are given permission to see the report, the assumption would be that because you've seen the contents of the grey papers, that you're able to stay in the meeting for the discussion, but that's still at the discretion of the chair. The chair in making the decision would still, though, have to weigh up the fact that you have been given access to an exempt report because you've given an appropriate rationale for seeing that report, and I, as monitoring officer, have decided that that's acceptable. The chair then has to weigh that up against the issues to do with whether it's commercial sensitivity or whatever else it might be that makes the report exempt in the first place. So the decision lies with the chair, but it's in the context of you should, ask for the papers to be sent to you when they come out with a reason why. So it all comes back to the access to information procedure rules, really.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, I think the point I was getting at is when I was chair of OSB and I would attend executive meetings, and before the executive meetings, I was sent copies of the exclusion documents, and I was asked to approve them. So I would be sent them beforehand. I would approve them. When I would turn up at the executive meeting, I would be excluded when the present public were excluded, but I'd already seen the reports and I'd approved them. So that was my disagreement, that how can you exclude me when I know what you're going to be discussing, because I've approved them. So it was like, clarification. I'm not classed as present public. I'm elected by members in my ward to speak up for members of my ward, and as chair of OSB, it was like there was no clarity. It was turn up one day, and it would be whether the chair would let me stay or not. But he did exclude me on occasions when I'd already seen the report. So it's a bit like, it doesn't make sense. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can I come in?
Yes,
Chair?
you can. I can see you were only just. Yes, come on in, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Thompson. I'm not saying OSB is such an important scrutiny board, and it's totally wrong for them to be, excluded. I'm not sure what you can do on that, Charlotte, but as Councillor Thompson says, if you're signing things off and whatever, and then you're excluded from the executive, it's just doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Charlotte?
I'll come back to the point that I made before, which is that it is at the discretion of the chair, but I think there's a slightly separate point being made about the two of you being chairs of the Overview and Scrutiny Board, and we are working on an executive scrutiny protocol, aren't we, Sylvia? And I wonder whether that arrangement, as in the chair of OSB saying in the meeting regardless, is something that could be mooted in that document.
Yeah, that is already in the draft that I've created, that that the chair of OSB should be allowed to stay in the meeting for those items. But then obviously if other members request to stay, because generally if a meeting is being held in private or it's an urgent discussion, then as you say, the chair of OSB has to sign that off, and it's not subject to call, and that's why when there's an urgent report or something's not subject to calling, then that's why the chair of OSB is critical to having that meeting, so there's some overview there that there's still some effective challenge there possible without it going in the full public domain for challenge. So I think the chair of OSB is a critical role in that, and therefore that's why I've started the draft and I have included that in, but other members would still be subject to the discretion of the chair, or if they have a need to know basis. obviously if it affects their wards.
Sorry. Councillor Halawi.
Slightly related to that, reminds me, Charlotte, of a conversation we had about members' attendance at executive meetings, and specifically with virtual meetings. And is it or is it not the case that if members want to attend executive meetings, we have to give prior notice and also have questions that we want to ask? So is that a change, therefore, from the previous arrangement where we could just turn up at executive meetings and be without questions because we were entitled to listen to the meeting? I'm not talking about the excluded parts and present public, none of that. It's just the general principle. I've been told I can't attend exec meetings online unless I get specific permission from the mayor and I have questions that I want to submit. Is that the case? Is that what we're operating now as a constitutional arrangement in the virtual world?
The executive meetings are in person now, Councillor.
Right. So if we have virtual ones, that's the point I'm making, as was the case before, do we still have to go through having the mayor's agreement that we can attend virtually and have questions? It's that point that I'm really interested, because if we go into any more virtual worlds, I think it needs to be clear.
Sylvia looks like she wants to answer that.
Sylvia.
I can just say that members are entitled to attend all council and committee meetings. You don't have to be invited to those meetings, but it's at the discretion of the chair as to whether they will allow you to speak in those meetings. That's the difference. So,
mine wasn't about speaking, Sylvia. I understand that. My point, sorry, Chair, was simply whether we can attend. I was told I can only attend on condition the mayor agrees and on condition that I submit my questions in advance. But I might not have had questions. I just wanted to hear what was being discussed. That was
and I think that was misinformation that's being given to councillors, because it's not up to any chair to agree whether somebody can attend. No. The councillor can attend that meeting. Any councillor can attend any council meeting unless it's a private meeting. Again, it's down to the discretion of the chair as to whether they allow you to speak in that meeting or to ask questions.
So, Chair, could I please request that that information is put clearly out to all councillors, so there's no grey areas about us having to ask permission of someone to just attend a meeting to observe? Okay, I take the point. If you need to ask a question, we get permission, but it really wasn't about that. It was about our eligibility to attend meetings.
Councillor Hall.
I'd like a message. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think this all came about when it becomes virtual meetings, you do have to ask for an invite just so you can be invited to the meeting. Where before you used to, if it was in public, you'd just be able to turn up. So I think you still do have to ask for an invite so you could join.
Yeah, you would have to ask for an invite to get a link done, but it wasn't that. It was about whether you were whether someone said you could attend or not. That's the point I was making.
Well,
same,
like
Brian.
Sylvia says, I think the mix-up is that anyone can attend. No one can be stopped from attending.
I think we could do with some clarity in terms of virtual meetings.
Isn't there a limit on it because of the COVID safety reasons?
No, I was talking about virtual ones, Chair.
Virtual, yeah.
There is no limits on virtual. There is limits on in-person meetings at the minute because of the COVID regulations and limits to the number of people that can be in the room. So if it's in person, all we do is ask members to advise us in advance that they want to attend, because we will have, depending on the meeting, the number of spaces that we have available for people to sit in. So, and again, that's not to say that you can't attend, but we'd like you to advise us that you want to attend. So again, from an administrative point of view, but what I can do is clarify that in the council procedure rules when I'm reviewing that section as part of the constitution to make it clear. And I will advise my staff, or all of my staff again, that if members do approach them, what that is, because I am aware that there was some miscommunication went out, Alma. And so you are right about what you've been told, but it was incorrect. And I have advised staff of that, but I will certainly make that clear again.
Thank you. It's just so we know where we stand in the virtual world that might reoccur at this rate. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. Charlotte, you got nothing else? Right. Okay. With this, we'll call this meeting to a close. wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for those of you I don't see. And no doubt I'll see you all in January, all being well. Thank you for your attendance today. Goodbye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Chair.